The House Judiciary Committee room was already buzzing before the hearing even began. Cameras were stationed in every corner, lenses trained on the long table where lawmakers would soon square off. The agenda read urban crime and federal intervention, but anyone paying attention knew this was going to be less about policy and more about political theater. Representative Jasmine Crockett sat at her spot, flipping through a thick binder tabbed in bright colors. She wasn't here to improvise, she was here to dismantle. Across from her, Senator Ted Budd leaned back in his chair, one arm draped casually over the armrest, the other fiddling with a pen. He had that confident smirk politicians wear when they think the day's headline is already theirs. When the chair recognized him, Budd wasted no time. "Representative Crockett," he began, his tone slow, deliberate, almost condescending, "you've often defended cities with some of the highest crime rates in the country. You blame the system, but I say leadership matters. Don't you think it's time urban leaders like yourself admit that their policies are failing?" The room quieted just enough for his words to hang. Crockett didn't move. She simply closed her binder, folded her hands, and let the pause stretch until it was uncomfortable. Her gaze locked on Budd, unblinking. "Senator," she said evenly, "I'm glad you brought that up, because it's about time someone in this room stopped talking at communities and started listening to them." A few aides glanced up from their laptops. The tension was already shifting. Budd sat up straighter, ready for his rebuttal, but Crockett wasn't going to give him the luxury of setting the tone. Crockett leaned forward, her voice calm but carrying across the room. "You want to talk about crime? Let's talk facts, Senator Budd. In the last 5 years, violent crime rates have risen fastest in rural counties, not in cities like mine. And do you know what's driving a lot of it? Poverty, lack of mental health care, addiction. Problems your own state ranks near the top in, year after year." Budd smirked like he was ready to swat that away, but Crockett didn't give him the chance. "And before you say it, no, Senator, I'm not making excuses. I'm talking about causes. You can't fix a problem if you won't even name it." She slid a sheet of paper across the table toward him. The cameras caught it, an official Department of Justice report highlighted in yellow. "This is your state, Senator. North Carolina's rural homicide rate surpassed several major cities last year. That's not my opinion, it's your reality." The sound in the room shifted, no applause, no outburst, but a ripple of attention as reporters scribbled notes. Budd leaned in, voice dripping with sarcasm. "So now it's rural America's fault that your cities are unsafe?" Crockett didn't blink. "No, Senator. It's the fault of leaders who think crime is a political weapon instead of a human crisis. Leaders who cut funding for prevention, who vote against community programs, and then stand here pretending they've got the moral high ground." The chairwoman raised an eyebrow. The air was getting heavier. Crockett wasn't just defending, she was setting the trap. Budd's pen tapped against the table as he leaned forward, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Representative, with all due respect, I don't need a lecture on statistics. I've been to these neighborhoods." Crockett's eyes narrowed. "Really? Which ones?" she asked, her tone flat but sharp enough to slice through the interruption. Budd hesitated, then stumbled out a vague answer. "Well, communities in Charlotte, Raleigh." She didn't let him finish. "Charlotte and Raleigh aren't in my district, Senator. And you didn't answer my question. Which neighborhoods in my district have you actually visited?" The silence was deafening for a moment. A reporter in the back glanced up from his phone. Budd tried to laugh it off, leaning back in his chair with a shrug. "Look, the point is..." "No," Crockett cut in, her voice suddenly firmer. "The point is you're talking about crime in communities you've never even set foot in. That's not leadership. That's stereotyping from a safe distance." Gasps and murmurs rippled from the press section. Budd's jaw tightened, but he pushed forward. "I'm talking about holding leaders accountable when their policies fail. And I'm talking about holding you accountable," Crockett shot back, "when you use selective outrage to score political points." The chair banged the gavel once for order, but it was clear, the exchange had shifted. Bud wasn't controlling the narrative anymore. Crockett flipped open her binder again, the colored tabs like a battle map. "Since you want to talk about leadership, Senator, let's review yours," she said, pulling out another document. "This is from the North Carolina Department of Public Safety, your state. In the past 3 years, violent crime in Robeson County has jumped by 17%. In Rockingham County, drug-related arrests are at an all-time high. And you know what else? Those counties have been under conservative leadership for decades." Bud shifted in his seat, his jaw working as she continued. "I don't bring this up to shame those communities, they deserve investment, support, and solutions. I bring it up because you stand here pointing fingers at cities like mine while your own backyard is on fire." She slid the document forward. "Your record shows you voted against increased funding for rural law enforcement grants in 2023. You voted against expanding mental health programs in low-income counties. And yet, you've got the nerve to lecture me about crime prevention?" Bud opened his mouth, but Crockett's tone sharpened before he could speak. "Senator, you're not fighting crime, you're fighting narratives that make you look good on television. And that's the difference between us. I'm here to solve problems. You're here to perform." The room went still. Even the chair didn't try to interrupt this time. Bud leaned forward, his voice tighter now. "Representative, you can throw numbers around all day, but at the end of the day, crime comes down to personal responsibility. People make choices, and leaders like you make excuses for them." Crockett didn't flinch. She let him finish, then leaned in, her tone measured but cold. "Personal responsibility? Let's talk about that. Is it personal responsibility when a kid grows up in a neighborhood where the only grocery store closed 5 years ago, but the liquor store is still open on every corner? Is it personal responsibility when someone works 2 jobs and still can't afford rent because wages haven't kept up with inflation for decades?" Bud tried to interject, but she kept going. "Is it personal responsibility when an opioid crisis ravages rural North Carolina, and instead of funding treatment centers, your party slashes budgets and calls it fiscal discipline? You want to lecture me about choices? How about the choices made right here in these halls that put communities in impossible positions?" She let the words hang. "Senator, crime isn't a moral failing, it's a policy failure. And the people failing are sitting in these seats, not just in those streets you like to talk about." Several aides glanced at each other, the press section was typing furiously. Bud's smile had vanished entirely. Bud leaned toward his mic, cutting in mid-sentence. "Representative, with all due respect." Crockett didn't even look down at her notes. She turned her head just enough to meet his eyes and said, slow and deliberate, "Senator, you've already disrespected me 3 times today. I'm still waiting for the part where you make a point." The room froze. It wasn't loud, no shouting, no theatrics, but the line hit like a gavel. Even the chair blinked in surprise. Bud's mouth opened, then closed again, as if searching for a comeback that wasn't there. She continued, her voice calm but razor-sharp. "If you want to have an adult conversation about solutions, I'm here. If you want to keep interrupting me so you can hear yourself talk, I can promise you, this committee doesn't have the patience, and neither do I." Somewhere in the press section, a muffled chuckle escaped. Bud shifted in his seat, the smirk gone entirely now. Crockett leaned back, hands folded, as if to say your move. The chair tapped her pen against the desk but didn't call for order. Everyone knew the momentum had shifted completely. Crockett opened her binder again, flipping to a tab marked in bright red. "Senator, I'm looking at your own statements from last year, your words, not mine." She held up a printed page for the cameras to catch. "Right here, you said, we need to address the root causes of crime in rural America the same way we do in cities." Bud's eyes narrowed. "And I stand by that." "Good," she replied instantly, her tone sharpening. "Because that means you agree with me. The difference is, I'm actually trying to pass the funding to do it. She tapped the page, voted against the bipartisan Public Safety and Community Health Act that would have done exactly what you said here. He shifted in his seat. That bill was bloated with. No, Senator. That bill was packed with solutions. Addiction treatment programs. Job training for at-risk youth. Investments in neighborhood infrastructure, urban and rural. You didn't vote against waste, you voted against results. The press section erupted in furious typing. Crockett leaned in slightly, her voice dropping but still cutting through the room. You can't campaign on fixing a problem, then block the fix when it shows up. That's not leadership. That's hypocrisy with a microphone. A few heads in the gallery nodded subtly. Bud clenched his pen so tightly the plastic bent under his fingers. Crockett paused, closing her binder for the first time. Senator, I didn't grow up reading about these problems in reports. I grew up living them. She leaned forward, her voice quieter now, pulling the room in. When I was 14, my family's car was stolen. My mom called the police, but they never came, not for 2 days. You know why? Because they were short-staffed, underfunded, and working 3 other major cases at the same time. By the time they showed up, the car was stripped and dumped in a field. She took a breath. That's not a story about bad people making bad choices. That's a story about a system stretched so thin it breaks. And when it breaks, people lose faith, not just in the police, but in their government. That's when communities start to fall apart. Bud shifted slightly, but she didn't look away. That's why I fight for funding. For prevention. For investment. Because I've seen what happens when those things are missing. And Senator, if you'd seen it too, maybe you'd be a little less quick to score political points and a little more willing to do the work. The room was silent, except for the faint tapping of reporters' keyboards. Crockett leaned back, letting the weight of her words settle. Bud straightened in his chair, clearly trying to regain footing. Representative, I respect your passion, but passion doesn't solve problems. We need discipline, accountability, and real-world solutions, not emotional appeals. Crockett tilted her head slightly, a half-smile forming. Senator, passion without action is just noise. And discipline without compassion? That's just cruelty dressed up as policy. The line landed hard. A low murmur spread across the gallery, even a few committee members glanced at each other. Bud's face tightened, but he didn't speak. She continued, you call my stories emotional appeals. I call them reality checks. The people I represent don't live in think tanks. They live in neighborhoods where the streetlights don't work, where the grocery store is an hour away, and where safety isn't a talking point. It's a question mark. Her voice sharpened for the final blow. If you think caring about those people makes me less effective, then maybe the problem isn't my passion, it's your priorities. The chair's eyes flicked toward the clock, signaling the exchange was near its end. Bud looked down at his notes, tapping his pen but saying nothing. Crockett folded her hands on the desk, her voice steady, deliberate. Senator, this isn't about winning an argument. It's about whether people will be safer tomorrow than they are today. Every time we turn these hearings into partisan theater, the only ones who lose are the people we're supposed to be serving. She glanced toward the cameras. The mother who's scared to let her kid walk home from school. The store owner who closes early because the street outside isn't lit. The veteran in a rural town who can't get treatment for his PTSD. They're not watching to see who scored a debate point, they're watching to see if we care enough to fix it. Her gaze returned to Bud. You said earlier that crime comes down to personal responsibility. Well, I'm holding you to that. Your responsibility, my responsibility, every one of us sitting in these chairs. And if we can't take responsibility for the policies that create the problems, then we don't deserve to talk about solutions. The chair called time, but Crockett didn't look away from Bud as she delivered the last sentence. I'm not here to make you comfortable, Senator. I'm here to make you accountable. Silence followed, thick, deliberate, and completely in her control. At the end of the day, Senator, crime isn't a headline, it's a lived reality. It's the sound of a mother triple-locking her door because the streetlight outside has been broken for years. It's the shop owner who's too afraid to stay open past dark. It's the veteran in a small town who's battling demons without a single treatment center within 50 miles. You can call my words emotional, but what I'm really bringing you is evidence that policies, or the lack of them, are writing the stories in our communities. And if those stories keep ending in fear, instability, and neglect, then the blame doesn't rest with the people on the streets, it rests with the people in these seats. I'm not here to protect anyone's comfort. I'm here to confront the gaps, the failures, and the excuses. Because accountability isn't optional, it's the bare minimum. And if that makes this room uncomfortable, good. Maybe that discomfort will finally move us to do the job the American people sent us here to do.